Buying a used car can be a pretty daunting process. There's a lot for you to check, and if you get things wrong, it can be a very hefty bill on the other side of your purchase. So in this video, I want to show you how I would go about checking and inspecting a used car before I'm actually willing to commit to buy it. Now, I put the word realistic in the title here because I'm not planning on jacking this up. I'm not planning on having it on ramps. I'm planning to do an inspection as I actually would if I was planning on buying a used car, because in my almost 10 years of buying and selling car experience, that's never really been a realistic option. So let's take a look at what you should do before you even get started, and then we'll get into it. The first thing I would normally do is check the MOT history of the car. You can do that by going to the MOT website, MOT checker sites, and putting in your car's registration, and you can see the entire history of the vehicle. You can also see if it's due an MOT or one is upcoming, and you can see what it's maybe failed on in the past or has had advisories on and that may have been replaced. I would also check for known faults with the vehicle. For example, my 2013 Audi S4 has a fairly common front ball joint problem, as they decided to use two ball joints that pivot as the wheel turns instead of a fairly standard single ball joint at the top, and so those are pretty common to fail, and so I know that when I go to inspect the car, that's something that I need to pay specific attention to. So once you're happy with the history of the car and the known faults, you can then talk to the current owner, whether that's the dealership or whether that's a private seller, and go and arrange an inspection. Now, there are some things that you want to look up beforehand, things like how to open the bonnet and how to find the OBD2 port location, which we'll talk more about in a minute. But when you're contacting the seller, the one thing that I would normally ask is, can you leave the car cold? Don't start it up beforehand, because you'll want to listen to how the engine and battery sound when you start it up for the first time. So with all of that out of the way and you've arrived at the car to come and inspect it, the first thing I do is have a look around. Look for any accident damage, any paint chips. For example, my S4 has a little bit of paint damage over on the far side and has a few rock chips up at the front, but that's nothing major. If there is serious damage, then of course that's something to consider. And when you open the bonnet, which we'll talk more about in a second, make sure that you check the frame rails, which are normally in the front of the car, to make sure that they don't look collapsed. Otherwise, it's been in an accident. Now, the next thing I would normally do is check inside the bonnet, which means you have to, well, open it first. In my car, it is a lever on the driver's side door pillar, but it can be anywhere under the driver's side footwell or in the passenger side footwell. That's why I would recommend you check to work out where it is before you get there. Either way, you pop it, which normally releases the front catch, and then you can release the second one. Now, again, this also varies per car, but mine is just a flap, and you can lift the bonnet up and start inspecting. Now, while you're in here, there is a lot for you to check. The first thing that I would do is check those frame rails to make sure that they're nice and straight and they don't look bunched up, and then you can be fairly confident that it's not been in an accident. Then I would take a look at the oil filler cap. Now, this isn't how you check how much oil it has, but it is how you check if it has a head gasket leak. If it looks frothy and foamy in there, then that is a pretty serious head gasket leak and you want to steer clear. You'll also want to check all of the fluid levels. Now, in my car, I don't actually have a dipstick. It is a dipstick cap, but it's likely that your car will, and so you'll want to check the level of that. If the level is low, then that can suggest that the current owner hasn't taken quite as good care of it as you might hope. You also want to check things like the coolant level to make sure that that is a reasonable color, not say dark brown, and that it is within the minimum maximum line, and your brake fluid as well. Again, a reasonable color, normally clear or yellow, sometimes colored, but definitely not dark brown, and again that it's within minimum maximum. You also want to take a look around the rest of the engine bay. Does it look dirty, or does it look like it's clean? Does it have any rust, especially up near the front suspension points where the struts meet the frame? If it does have rust, that's normally a sign to run for the hills, but if it looks nice and clean, then that's normally a good sign, normally means it's been looked after. And you can also check for oil leaks down the sides, especially if you can see down the back and down the front as well. If it's just a small dribble, then it's normally not too much of a problem, but if it looks like there's a waterfall of oil, maybe steer clear. And you'll also want to check the auxiliary drive belts. These are the things that power your alternator, often your power steering pump and your AC. So you want to make sure that these look in good condition, they don't look cracked or ripped or anything like that, and that they are the tensioners that hold them tight all look to be in good shape too. Now that's pretty much everything I would look at inside the engine bay, besides an obvious check over to see if there are any other leaks, especially from things like your brake ABS pump. But other than that, that's mostly what I would look for. The next thing I would look at is down each of the wheels. Now, a really good way to help check all of the stuff we want to look at here is to turn the steering wheel at full lock to one direction. That means that you can take a look at the full width of the tire really easily. You can check how much tread it has left, make sure that there's plenty of meat left on it, and that there's not any cracking, especially on the edges of the tire. You can also look at the sidewall of the tire and look for the dot or the date code, which is normally in a circular ended rectangle, and that has 4 numbers in it. The first 2 are the week of its manufacture, and the second 2 are the year. The newer the tire, the less likely you are to need to replace it, and the more likely it's been replaced recently, which is normally a good sign. While you're down here, you can also look at the brakes. What you're looking for here are 2 main things. The brake discs to be in good condition, especially not a large lip on the top of them. And the second thing is the brake pads. You want to make sure that there's plenty of meat left on them, otherwise you're going to need to change them reasonably soon. And I would also check the suspension on each of the corners, especially on the front when you can turn the steering wheel outwards so you can see in the front, as that normally gives you better visibility. You should check your springs to make sure they're not cracked and that the seats that they sit in look to be in good condition, not rusted through, for example. Also your shock absorbers to make sure that they don't have any oil leaking out of them, and again also look in good condition. And even things like your control arms to make sure they're not rusted, bushings and ball joints to see that they're not cracked or broken, and everything looks to be in place. So once you're happy with the exterior, the running gear, the engine bay, you can then look under the car as well to make sure that there's nothing obviously rusting through, especially if you have under trays, that they are still there. And then once you're happy with all of that, you can take a look inside the car. Now there are a few things that are probably pretty obvious that you should check. Things like the condition of the seats. Is the fabric in good condition? Does it have rips or tears? Does it look like it's wearing through anywhere? Especially in the back seats, as people can forget to check those, and in the boot as well. Then you want to make sure that all of the standard functions that you would normally use, things like all of the lights, all of the interior lights, all of the sun visors, the radio functions, all of that stuff actually works, because you can forget to check that and can end up being fairly costly if you don't catch it. So once you're happy with the visual inspection and testing all of the in-car electronics, you can then think about checking the software side. Now I have one of these OBD2 readers. This is a wireless one that connects to my phone. It's actually really useful. You can get more basic ones that are just standalone units, or you can go the much more fancy and dedicated route and crack out a laptop with something like Delphi Autocom, which is a pretty universal tool, or you can even go as far as getting dealership diagnostic software like Volvo's Vida, Mercedes Entry, Otis, or what's it called? VCDS for VW Group. So there's a lot of different options, but this is a very good starting point anyway. All you do is you plug it into the OBD2 port, which is something you should check where that is in your car before you go and visit, but all you do is plug it in, connect your phone, and read the fault codes. If there are no fault codes stored, that's normally a good sign, although the current owner may have cleared the fault codes before you got there, so keep that in mind. And if there is fault codes, then you can work out what they are, how much it might be to fix, and maybe use that as either a reason to walk away from the deal or as leverage to help get a better deal when you come to negotiate. So with the software all checked, you can then think about starting the car. Now you want to be listening out for how the car starts. There's quite a lot of things that you can listen for, specifically if the car or the engine sounds quite weak or slow to start up, then it can mean that the battery or the starter motor are on their way out. There's also a load of other things, but the main thing you're listening for as the good sign is that it starts up easily, there's no problems, it doesn't really splutter to life, and it just sounds like an easy, healthy start. So for example, if I stick the key in, you can hear that this starts up no problem, starts up quickly. The exhaust sounds fine, doesn't sound like there's any holes in the exhaust throughout the length of it, and especially stationary, it's still revs fine, there's no limiters or anything like that, so it all sounds pretty good. Now when you go for a test drive in the car, the main things that you want to listen out for are rattles or knocking, especially from outside the car, from the suspension. If there are rattles and knocking from there, or screeching from the brakes, again, that can be either a good reason to walk away from the deal or a good reason to negotiate later. Otherwise, as long as especially gearbox, that can be a point of contention. As long as, especially if it's manual, the clutch feels like the biting point is in a reasonable position, it's not all the way at the end of the travel, it shifts into all the gears, fine, well, whatever, and that it accelerates well, the engine doesn't speed up while the road speed doesn't, that would indicate clutch slipping. That's normally a good sign. If it's an automatic, then you want to make sure that the shifts are nice and smooth, it doesn't feel like it lurches heavily when it changes gear, and that it will go up and down the gears with no problems, will creep along just fine. And just generally checking how you would use the car on a daily basis. If you tend to do a lot of motorway miles, then it's best to try and make your test drive go on the motorway, even if it's just for one junction and come back again, so that you can see how it feels, how comfortable it is, how the steering feels, how the power feels, the ride and handling, all that sort of stuff. But if you're more of a pottering around town car user, then again, try and potter around town for a few minutes to see how that feels. See how it feels in stop and start traffic, if it lurches to a stop, or if the brakes feel, comfortable, easy to use, all that sort of stuff. Try and make use of it in your test drive how you would in the real world. So if you're happy with how it drives, how it sounds, how it rides, then you can start negotiating. Now, of course, that's not a complete comprehensive guide of everything you could ever need to know about inspecting used cars, but I think it's a good starting place, especially from a realistic standpoint where you don't have the car up on ramps or jacks or whatever, but you can still inspect the vast majority of the car without any of that. And of course, I know that there is a lot to remember there, so I'm going to leave a pinned comment down below that will have all of the steps that I would recommend you check through, and you can screenshot that and use that as a rough guide the next time you go to inspect a car. If, by the way, you have any suggestions for things that I've missed or things that people should definitely check out, then feel free to leave that in the comments as well, and I will add that to the list of things that you should check when you go to inspect used cars. And if you want to see more videos like this one, I post every week, so if you want to hit that subscribe button, feel free to do so, and hit that notification bell. I have some reviews of this car, my 2013 Audi S4, and a Renault hybrid press event that I went to a few weeks ago, so you can check that one out as well. I'm also going to be doing a whole load more videos, including some tool comparisons, some DIY repairs, servicing, that kind of thing, and hopefully some more car reviews in the not too distant future as well. That is pretty much it for this video. Like I said, if you have any thoughts yourself, then feel free to leave that in the comments down below. And thank you for joining me at the wheel. I will see you guys in the next video.